Yeah, I'll leave with it. And welcome to Aga Khan Social Welfare Board's Parent Support Group webinar. This evening, we are talking about how to support and manage your child's sensory needs. And I'd like to welcome Zuliana Sachadina, experienced occupational therapist who has worked in different settings, who will be talking to us about this topic this evening. Zuliana, over to you.
Thank you for joining us today. I'm hoping, well, the topic today is strategies to support sensory needs. I'm hoping to bring together and to try and talk you through an area that's called sensory processing and understand together why this is so important for many of our children. So the aims of today's session are to understand what is occupational therapy. It's an interesting profession and yet very varied and complex. So I'm hoping I'd be able to talk you through what occupational therapy is, understand what sensory processing is, understand the different sensory systems, why they are important, when to seek professional help, and some strategies to help you support your child at home and just create some awareness of where your child is in other environments. And just to add to that, the aim is also to share my knowledge today and to put sensory process into perspective for you and what that means for the child. It's not individual advice for children. So for more specific advice, you need to seek professional help. So let's start off. So occupational therapists put the child in the center and see how they interact with their environment and their occupation. A child's occupation is things like play. So how they play, how they use their motor skills to play, how they use their foundational skills to be able to play. We look at the area of productivity. For a child, that means what they do during the day. They access nurseries, they access school, they access further education. This is a child's productivity. A child's area of self-care is how they dress themselves, how they feed themselves. Now, when a child can't engage in their own occupations and they have difficulties in any of these areas, an occupational therapist will help analyze where the difficulties are. Now, if I can begin to make you think of a pyramid, the base of this pyramid is your sensory processing, all your senses. Now, the word sensory processing will become clearer as the slides go on, but it's all your sensory systems. So those need to be intact at the base of the pyramid before we can look at the child's motor skills, before we can look at the child's perceptual skills, and before we can look at cognition for the child, and whatever age and whatever stage of learning this child may be in. So if I can use the term sensory processing to explain that it's how the brain takes in the information, how it sorts out the information, and how it processes and makes use of the information in order for the child to be able to engage in the activities of daily living and respond to the demands and needs of the environment. So we talked about a child's occupation as being play. So does the child have all the prerequisite skills to be able to engage in play? So what happens is the senses come into the brain. Again, it takes information, it sorts it out, it processes it, and it gives an appropriate response to the environment. So the child is able to engage in that activity. This system happens automatically, unconsciously, and in typically developing children, it's integrated really well by the age of 8 to 10. And generally, it starts in infancy, goes through childhood, and is refined further through each one of our lives. I like this analogy, and I like to call it the analogy of Heathrow Airport, somewhere I really miss at the moment. So if you can imagine the control tower as a child's brain, planes go out safely. How do planes go out safely? The information that comes into the control tower is processed by the control tower, and the plane goes out in the right time with the correct response and successfully. If we think of our senses as the same thing, our brain is a control tower. The senses that are received need to be processed and timely responded to. It's a good analogy to come back to whenever we're thinking of what's happening for some of these children. So I've talked about senses, but I think we could do a little activity, if that's okay, Cheyenne.
Sure.
So how many senses do we have, and what are they? If I can give you a minute, and if you don't mind just putting in a few words, few numbers into the chat box, so I get a sense of what we all mean by our senses. So how many senses do we have, and what are they?
We have one answer so far, 5.
Thank you. Any more?
Yep, another 5. One says 6. But one says 5 physical ones plus emotional ones.
Thank you.
We've got one person said touch, smell, sight, feel. Last one, not sure. Got 5.
Brilliant. We can stop there. Thank you. That's helpful. And yes, you're right. We do have 5 and 6 and a few more. So we actually have 8 senses. Now, the ones you've all mentioned, which I'll spend less time on, is the first line is your auditory, so your sound, the noises and sounds from the environment. You hear a siren, you know it's an ambulance. So you've heard your sense, you've translated it, you know what it is. It's a siren. It's an ambulance. It's a police car. Olfactory, for smell, it detects different smells. It's a safety system too, to be able to detect sense of burning. Your visual sense, you're right, you've also named it sight. It's to see the environment, to understand where you are. The gustatory system, which is your taste, what you taste in your food, sweet versus sour versus savory. So I think those are the few that were named frequently. So I'm going to actually now talk about the 3 other ones that children with sensory processing difficulties present with. Okay, the first one is proprioception. I'll refer the word proprioception and body position. The proprioception tells us where our body is in space. So it's activated by muscles actively working against gravity. So I'm sitting on my chair right now. My proprioceptive system tells me where I am. I don't need to look. I know my body has a sense of where I am. Your vestibular system is your body movement. It's knowing where you're moving to. Now, your vestibular system is managed by the balance in your ear. So when you're on a swing or a slide, that's the sense that you're getting when you're moving. Your tactile system is your sense of touch, and your skin, which is your biggest receptor, is the vehicle for tactile. And the last one is interoception. Now, that's a fairly new system that's still being discovered, but that looks at emotional regulation. It also looks at things that are automatic, that we're not always aware of. So when we need to go to the toilet, what tells us that our system, what's the sensory system that tells us, oh, I need to go to the toilet? Or what's the sensory system that tells us this is how I feel? And that's interoception. So each of these senses that we all have, children with difficulties in these areas experience these senses, either they seek the sense or they avoid the sense. So every sensory system is going to have a seeking and an avoiding. So it's an important skill for children to be regulated in, so to be able to respond to the environment, to be able to adapt to what they're given in the environment. So this system needs the right information at the right time, and the right amount needs to come into the control tower. So what happens when that doesn't happen? The next few slides are going to show you some pictures of what it looks like if a child is avoiding the behavior or if the child is seeking the behavior. And we'll go through each of them, some quicker than others, but I want you to have visual cue of what we're talking about when we move on to strategies to help these children. So this is body position. This is our proprioceptive system, knowing where our body is in space. This child, often you hear parents, schools, teachers, other people refer to these children in the way I'm going to describe the next few slides. And they say, my child appears lazy, or prefers to sit still, or prefers repetition of familiar activities. So this is your child avoiding this proprioceptive system. The child seeking the same sense is the child jumping, bumping, crashing, the child who loves rough and tumble play, the one you hear stomping their feet, who can never walk quietly, the one who grinds their teeth, does everything with too much force, drops things often, bumps into things often. Movement, this is your vestibular system. If a child is avoiding this type of movement, this type of system, so the senses coming in are too much for the child and they're avoiding it, what you see is they avoid going on the slides and swings in the playground, because remember, your vestibular system is movement, and it's activated with any movement, and it's a balance in your ears. They generally move slowly and cautiously. They're afraid of being tipped upside down, carried, and they don't like rough and tumble play. The child who seeks this movement, the child who really wants that vestibular input, is a child who's always running, jumping, and hopping, often can't sit still, and enjoys jumping on the furniture, will choose trampolines, will choose the merry-go-round spinning options at the playground. Touch, the child that doesn't like to have messy play. You see that earlier on. They want their hands washed as soon as they've eaten, as soon as they've got something on their hands. They don't like to be in crowded places. They don't like people too close to them. They want to know they've got their space. They generally are a bit more concerned when it's hair wash time or cutting nails. They don't like particular textures of clothes on their skin. And they react quite severely with a little bit of an injury, a little bit of a tap or a minor cut, which you might think it's something small, but they react quite severely with minor touches. That, I think, is self-explanatory, but the child who's seeking this behavior is touching everything. They're not aware that their hands and face are dirty. They're not bothered by their runny nose. They enjoy messy play. They seek messy play. Child who's avoiding sound. These are the children that sometimes don't like vacuum cleaners, hand dryers, the unexpected sounds of sirens, motorbikes going by. They don't like to be in crowded, noisy spaces. They don't like the cinema. They run away from noisy spaces. The child who seeks this behavior makes noise themselves for noise sake. They hum quite often, or they sing, or they'll be louder than the person speaking in the room because they are seeking this noise. And because they need more noise to be able to interact with their environment, they often need instructions repeated and repeated until they've registered it. Smell, another self-explanatory one, but smell, they notice smells before others have. They often are quite picky eaters, they're fussy eaters. They choose foods dependent on smell. The child who seeks the smell, they smell everything. They smell the pencil before they pick it up to write with it. They smell toys, they smell people. Visitors come in and they take their hand and they might smell their hand or their clothes. They seek to understand their environment through smell. Taste avoiders. They look at their food. They pick their tastes, their textures. They often don't like their food mixed up in different textures. They often like their food all separated in different colors, in different textures around their plate. and they get very distressed when it's all put together. So we've discussed what behaviours look like when children avoid behaviours or when they seek behaviours. So maybe it's a good time for you just to take a minute to ask yourself the question, what specific behaviours do you observe in your child? What senses do they relate to? Were they avoiding or seeking these behaviours? Okay, our 8 senses are back. Now, the top 4 that's highlighted in red, they're environmental. So the strategies that we're going to use to support the child who shows us that they've got difficulties in this area tend to be adaptations that we can make to the child's environment. Now, remember in the beginning, I said occupational therapy looks at the child and how they interact with the environment and the occupation. So the child who's having difficulties, and if you've identified some behaviours that you see that make you think that something's not right in their sensory system, is generally these areas are linked to their environment. So there are adaptations that need to be made in every area of the child's life. So it is at school, it is in the playground, it's at grandparents' house, it's in your own home, in every room, in their bedroom, in their living room. So let's look at some strategies to adapt the environment. So the environment also includes the people within the environment. We always look for inclusion in any environment. And for children with quite severe needs in any of these areas, we should always create a sensory safe place for them within their home environment. Often it happens within school environments and other areas, but home environment is just as important. So the physical space, the bedroom, the living room, the dining room, start making note of what it is. Do they present the same way in every environment? Do you notice that actually they're more distressed in some environments than others? Have a look at the lighting in each of the rooms. Is that impacting the child? Is that one of their senses that's impacted? The colors of the room, are they bright? Are they dark? At home in their bedroom, have we posted and hung up all their artwork? Is that too much for them? Is it a cluttered space? Is it a clean space? Is it an empty space? What's the sound like in that space? I'm going to give you an example of a parent who said to me a few weeks back, they said, why is it, for those, I'm going to start actually, but for those of you who know Cafe Nero in Stanmore and Costa in Stanmore. So the parent said to me, why is it when we go to Cafe Nero in Stanmore that my child sits and has his hot chocolate? But when we go to Costa in Stanmore, he's always running around. He never finishes hot chocolate. So I went to both those coffee shops to check, and actually Cafe Nero in Stanmore is a smaller space. It's a darker space. The wall coloring is darker. The light is dimmer. The actual coffee tables are higher. The chairs are bigger. So this child felt contained and safe in that space. It was a small space. But in Costa, they've got lower tables. They've got coffee table styles with sofas, open space, loads of space to run around, bright colors, bright lights. So this child couldn't regulate their senses to be able to interact with the environment, to be able to have the correct response, which was to have his hot chocolate. So the environment can play a really big impact in any child's life in different settings. So it's important that everybody that works with your child is aware of what needs to happen for the child to be able to interact with the environment and make those adaptations or make those adaptations to allow the child to respond appropriately in that environment, whatever the expectations and whatever the demands for that environment are. So that's the environmental factor. So that's really important to get correct before moving on to then the ones that are linked to our internal system. So our body, the inside sense, the ones that we talked about that are automatic, the ones that just happen, but when it doesn't just happen, we need to help these children seek this information in different ways so they are able to produce these adaptive responses and engage with their environment. So if we look at proprioception, vestibular and tactile. So remember, that's your sense of body position in space, your movement and your touch. And all three of these sensory systems work very, very closely together. The strategies that we use are often linked and you can't separate one from the other. And actually they're dependent on each other as well. So important to note that a difficulty in one system doesn't mean that you've got difficulty in all three, but the way that the body responds, it needs input in all different areas. So let's start by those children that we saw the video clips who seek movement. These are the ones who are on the go. What's happening? Their body needs this movement. Their muscles need to feel where their body is in space. And the way they get it, you and I might be sitting still and know where our body is in space. But the way they receive this information is through bumping, jumping, crashing onto things, playing wrestling. What our role is to try and give them that input in a more appropriate way before they get to that wrestling, jumping, pulling, pushing phase. So this is why it's important for everybody in their environment to be aware of what their sensory needs are. So how do we give them this input? So the principles of proprioception are push, pull, carry, and lift. And that basically means that you're activating your muscles and joints to do an activity. So any activity you do has to be actively activating the child's muscles to be able to activate your proprioceptive input to be able to have a response to the environment. Now there's some pictures there and we'll go into more activities in a minute, but the principles of proprioception and vestibular input have to work together. Vestibular input, which is your balance, is generally linked to things moving in a line or in a circle. So we talked about children who avoid movement, who avoid senses and who seek senses. So the principle for treatment is the same. We need to look at children who, what things are going to alert the child or what things are going to calm them. So are they seeking or are they avoiding? And the activities can be the same, but it's how we provide the activities are very different. So the first one under alerting activities is a weight-bearing activity. So if you think about a wheelbarrow walking on your hands, the child who needs the alerting activity is going to be on the move. The child who needs to be calmer will only tolerate just staying still in that position. So it's really important to understand whether your child is avoiding it or seeking it, and then adapting your activities accordingly. So we said that for proprioceptive input, so your sense of body in space, to make sure that we don't want this child to be seeking the movement inappropriately, what do we do? In our home environment, we create opportunities and we provide opportunities regularly throughout the day so the child receives that input. And some ideas of pushing and pulling activities are when you're out shopping, the child pushes a heavy shopping trolley. They help you pull or pull along a heavy laundry basket. They do the vacuuming, the mopping, the sweeping. Another fun activity is playing tug of war with a kitchen towel. You can get them to do some gardening, digging, weeding, raking, watering the flowers, the plants, baking. stirring, rolling, kneading. If you think about all of these activities, what are they doing? They're actively getting the child to activate their muscles and engage in the activity. That response for the child activating it is a lot more responsive than for the adult doing it. So these are the active activities. More ideas are lifting and carrying activities. So things like shopping bags or weighted backpacks. So when you're out and about, get the child to carry their own backpacks, put their water bottle, put their lunch, put their snacks, and put a little bit more weight. And that weight's going to ground them. They're going to have a sense of where their body is in space. In the classroom often, or at home, you can do that too. You can stack or move chairs. Teachers often help the child do that as well because it's an easy activity within the classroom. Move objects, get them to take things from room to room. Try and make it a little bit heavier than just one book. Carry the recycling, filling up a watering can. So all those functional activities, all those things that have purpose that the child can do while they're working on their sensory system without being an extra thing. Positions for play. So when we looked at occupations for a child, we talked about occupations being play, productivity, or leisure. All of these activities need to be integrated into the child's life. So if the child is reading, how about getting them to read on their tummy? You're working against resistance, you've activated your muscles, and your proprioceptive system is helping you stay upright. You're working against gravity. Lots of animal walks. When you go from your bedroom to the bathroom, walking like an animal could be a bear, a frog. Create an animal, create a position, get the child to create an animal and how they walk. What's a really fun one? If you've got a yoga mat or another heavy mat, roll the child into a mat like a hot dog, and then the child rolls themselves out again. Crawl through tunnels, crawl through small spaces. Climbing the climbing frame when you're out at the park, the child going swimming. All of these activities, and this is just a handful. So if you look at your day as a family, you look at the activities that you do, and if this is what the child is seeking, just think, how can I add every hour, every opportunity, every few times a day? Where are these opportunities that I can find to add these activities into the child's day? The child who takes longer to register the movement or register the sense, they need a lot more input. So they need a combination of what the vestibular system does, which is wakes them up and a lot more movement, and the proprioceptive to then calm them to be able to be at the right alert level, to be able to learn, to be able to access their play, to be able to learn foundation skills. So these are the children who need a lot more jumping, a lot more trampoline work, a lot more movement before they're able to regulate themselves to be able to sit, to concentrate on a learning activity or a play activity. These are also the children that benefit from regular movement breaks. So no matter what age this child is, they're better off sitting, concentrating for 10 minutes, moving away for 30 seconds a minute, having that movement break and coming back for another 10 minutes. This child will struggle to sit for 40 minutes. So get a sense of what your child's needs are. Again, you've adapted the environment and you've also provided some strategies to help this child. These are also the children who you sometimes hear in the classroom that they fidget with things. They look for a pencil, they look for Play-Doh, they look for blue tack. They're constantly fidgeting. They need that something to have in their hands. But the reason they need it is to keep them alert, to keep the system alert and awake, to be able to engage with the learning or the play. Have regular sips of water. You may have heard of move and sit cushion, and we'll see some pictures towards the end. But it's a cushion that the child sits on, that they get a sense that they're wobbling, that they're constantly on the move, yet they're sitting quite contently at their desk. Look at the environment again, increase color contrast, use bright lights at workstations. So a child who seeks who seeks or avoids touch. The principle of touch is deep pressure. Now, proprioception, as you will remember, is the child being active. The tactile system is actually deep pressure, so like massage to the skin. Your skin is your biggest receptor. So lots of children come to you for hugs. They like that hug. The reason they come for that is their tactile system is then regulated with that deep pressure. So often this is not used, but alerting would be light touch. So if you have light tickly feather on your hand, you're going to push it away. It's an unexpected touch. It's not one that we use often. The calming activities are more often used, and it looks at firm pressure, deep pressure. It's continuous, it's constant. Children often, these are the children that often like the electric toothbrushes as well. Or they look for the toys, any of the vibrating toys, and they put it to their mouth or on their skin or anywhere else because they're seeking that pressure. Some of those pictures there are what children will also fidget when they call fidget toys in the classroom to help them concentrate. It's not for a lot of these children, they're more distracted when they don't have it. I know more recently I've heard the term concentrating toys. So it's an activity or a fidget toy to help the child concentrate. The activities that we talked about, give the child often deep hugs. Just use the techniques of a massage. Use the palms of your hands and push down on their shoulders, push down on their heads, push down on their arms and their legs. They will feel safe and secure. When they go to bed at night, tuck the blanket in, tuck it like a cocoon, tighter than you would normally. Use opportunities like bath time. When you're drying them, take the towel and really give them a big rub quite firmly, and it's not going to hurt. So the firmer you can be, the more response you'll get from the child. Messy play, grade the textures. Use dry textures, use wet textures, mix textures. If there's glue on the child's hand, see how they're responding. Do they like that? Do they not? What do we need to do to be able to have that child to accept that feeling? Sound. So the principles of sound are we have to make these environmental adaptations, but there is also the fact that none of these systems work on their own and they need the help of all the others to work together. And the sound system is one that works on loudness, quietness, sudden sounds, soft sounds, or rhythmical sounds. Now, the picture that you see is a child wearing ear defenders. When the environment can't be adapted, and especially in a busy classroom situation where children sometimes find it difficult to be able to concentrate with the amount of noise, sometimes things like this are used because we've exhausted the environmental options, and now we can use something like ear defenders. In a classroom situation or even at home, set up a child's workstation. So make sure there's no distractions on their table, on their walls. It often helps just to put some blinds up so they are literally in a closed space with only one activity on the desk at a time. And sometimes at home, ear defenders can also help.
Zuliana, can I ask a question?
Yeah, sure, go for it.
So in these strategies you're showing, which ones are you adopting if they're one variety of the other? So if in the last slide you showed the sound one.
Yeah.
They're seekers or they're ones who refrain from noise. Which ones go with what? Okay,
so it's how you grade the activity. So you'd use the same principles, but it's how you grade it. So to give you an example, a child who is seeking sound, what are they doing? So they might be grinding their teeth. Are they getting it from that? And then we need to break it down a little bit more. So if they're seeking, where are they seeking it from? Are they making sound for the sound's sake? Are they grinding their teeth? What is the behavior that we're seeing? And if they're avoiding it, is any noise too loud? Are they closing their ears? Are they hiding in small spaces? Are they going under the table? So you need to understand the behavior first and then grade the activity that you're doing. So potentially, and quite often, you can use the same activity. It's just how you grade it and what you do. So the child who is hiding on the table, that noise strategy itself isn't going to help. So we need to start with something, that's your environmental strategy. That's not in itself helping. So we need to start with our body strategy. And our body strategy is either our movement, which is our vestibular, or our deep pressure, or where our body is in space. Now, your proprioceptive system, so where your body is in space, is actually your magic system. So when in doubt, start with that. Start with all that heavy work. Start with work against resistance. So if you're out in the playground, hanging off monkey bars, climbing on the frame, use all of those strategies first, and then you can address the sound.
Okay.
Has that answered your question?
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, we can go into it further if that helps.
Okay. No, that's good.
Your oral motor strategies, these are the ones that these are the children that you see putting everything in their mouth. The pen tops, but they use, some of them use it for concentrating, so we can't always take the toys away from them or the activities away, but rather we give them more appropriate things that they are able to chew. So some of the pictures there are chewy tubes. There is a range, there's huge range. We've got necklaces that they can have that they then chew, but it's providing the right input. So actually it's acceptable, and the child's able to manage that behavior rather than chewing on the pencil or other things that maybe is not so appropriate. Your alerting activities, so if you think about generally it's going to be cold temperatures, chewing crunchy textures. So this is a good example of when the same activity can be a seeking or an avoiding one. So a chewing crunchy textures like carrot sticks and apples often alerts a child, but chewing dried fruit is actually more calming. So the muscles that we need to use to chew crunchy as opposed to dried, and how we chew and how long we chew for, all of that changes. So the same activity can be used. We just need to grade it with different things. This is a really good, some really good activities here. So it's oral motor, but it's linked again to our proprioceptive system and our vestibular system and our tactile system. Because what's happening, the child is grinding their teeth, the child's looking to chew something, but they need to know where their body is in space. They need to know their position of what's happening. Why am I needing to chew it? And the only way they're getting the feedback from the environment and from their body is by really pushing down on their teeth. So ways that we need to get those muscles more active, more alert, more awake. We can do things like the deep pressure around the mouth. Use straws to drink thicker fluids. So if you're giving them a yogurt rather than with a spoon, get them to suck it through a straw. That makes your muscles work. That makes your muscles awake around your mouth. Use water bottles with a sports spout rather than open bottle, because it makes the muscles work a little bit more. Use electric toothbrushes. And often deep pressure whenever you've come in to hug your child, give them this deep pressure, deep tactile, and this is your magic sense. Your proprioception, your deep touch, your deep pressure, it overrides, because of where it sits in the central nervous system, it overrides any other sense. So we always start with that. Here's some activity ideas. I know I've talked about different senses and seeking and avoiding, and you may or may not have come across some of these depending on your experiences so far, but like the top two, the wobble cushion, that's something that the child can sit on. You can use it at home. It's often used in school, and it gives them a sense of movement. There's air in it, and there's bubbles on it. So they're receiving the tactile sense through the bubbles and through the air. They're receiving the vestibular, which is a movement, as well as a sense of where the body is in space. So this works quite well for some children. The deep pressure vest, the vibrating cushion, I'd use with guidance from an occupational therapist. It is, on average, the recommendation is 20 minutes every hour for things like that, but that does need to be monitored a little bit closer. Schools often use the ball chair, and the peanut ball is another one that is quite similar. And what it does, it's a bit like a physio ball or a therapy ball, where you sit on it. They use that instead of a chair, and they just get that sense of movement. Again, you can use it at home. If it's a child who's not able to sit for long enough, or they don't like the movement or the sense or any of that, you can use something like the ball. A hokey stool, lots of schools are using this more and more, and actually it's a two-way stool. So one of them gives you the rotational movement, and one of the other ends gives you the linear movement. And the child sits on that instead of a classroom chair. Again, can be used at home. The weighted blanket is a weight that gives your body a sense of where they are. Often children don't need to move as much. These are also the children who avoid certain senses. It's a really good blanket just to put on them, to give them a sense of safety, to give them a sense of safe space and an awareness of where they are in their own space. The body sock is another favorite. It works a bit like, the fabric is a bit like a lycra fabric, so it's as much as a child can push or pull out of it. That same fabric even comes in tunnels, so you can use it to activate your muscles, to go inside it, to go under it, to go over it. Another really good equipment to use, but this is just a handful. There is lots and lots more. So when is occupational therapy needed? When the child has difficulty interacting with their environment or providing the right response to the environment, and you've tried all environmental changes and they haven't been effective, it's a good time to seek some guidance, some clarification, and just an assessment to see why is my child not able to play? Why is my child having difficulties to sit longer than however long it is for their age? Start thinking of those and definitely explore those if that's an area of concern. I've put together a few resources that might help you. These are some online resources that you can access. The Sensory Integration Network often does free talks for parents. There's webinars, there's some good sessions on that depending on your specific area that you're looking at. There's also a few books, if you prefer to read a few books, some good resources there. So I'm hoping we've been able to discuss and discover all our senses and how they integrate into our everyday activities for children, and how we can help some of our children who are having these difficulties seeking some sensations or avoiding some sensations, and just bringing it all together, and hopefully we can help support some of these children. Thank you. Over to you, Shaheen.
Thank you, Zuliana, for that presentation. I think it was really highlighted to each one of us about how each child is unique in the way that they interpret the world through the 8 senses. So thank you for the very practical advice and strategies that you have shared with us tonight. Thank you all for attending our webinar, and we look forward to seeing you at the next one. Yeah, I'll leave it there.